Hello, welcome to the Other Goddess podcast with spiritual detective Dr. Joanna Kujawa and its motto, if you want to be spiritual, ask difficult questions. In this podcast, we discuss the archetypes of the Other Goddess, new forms of consciousness they inspire, as well as the connection between sexuality and spirituality. You can join the conversation by signing to the Other Goddess podcast, my YouTube channel, Dr. Joanna Kujawa, and even better, through my book, The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddesses of Eros and Secret Knowledge, published by Sacred Stories. Today we take a different turn and discuss the archetypes of masculinity with Dr. Zeus Yiamouyiannis, who wrote a very important book, The Spiritually Confident Man. Hi, Zeus, how are you?
Hi, Joanna. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So Zeus, when I started writing my book, The Other Goddess, my journey actually started not with early goddesses, but with Mary Magdalene, because I noticed how she started to represent for me the other woman, which means the woman who is intellectually, spiritually, and sexually empowered, but who doesn't really fall into this old category that was of a mother. And although the mother archetype is a very beautiful archetype, I thought that it shouldn't be the only archetype that we discuss when we talk about women. So my journey started actually, exactly from a spiritual point of view and the role of Mary Magdalene and the way she was portrayed and very often vilified. So that was my journey towards my book. So perhaps you'd like to share with our listeners, how did you come into writing your own wonderful book about archetypes of masculinity that can inspire us?
Well, coincidentally, Joanna, the Mary Magdalene, it features prominently in my book as well, as somewhat of a future pulling us forward spiritually in terms of a relationship with she and Jesus. That was a relationship of mutual respect. Recent scholarship has affirmed, I think credibly affirmed, that she was actually the highest apostle in his ministry.
Yay!
And the two of them had a very co-equal and co-creative relationship, the one that I am trying to support in my book, and one in which I think a mutually learning relationship as well. They are, by historical accounts, married, and by many historical accounts, they had children as well. So, not that, that determines a family situation and that's what everyone should aspire to. In your own situation, you've chose consciously not to have children, but the giving birth to children of the spirit and to bring, to birth into this world a new, powerful, compassionate, love your enemy, love a stranger, love your neighbor way of working on this planet. Both of them were intimately involved in, and they were intimately involved in each other's lives in evolution and process. So I have her feature prominently in my book because it's precisely that kind of ideal understanding that helped me reflect back and develop what I call a sort of developmental or evolutionary archetypes for men that go well beyond the kind of classic old ones of the lover, the warrior, the king, the philosopher, the fool, and begin to really see archetypes of masculinity and femininity based and kind of born out in relationships between men and women. And then I was able to use that framework to begin to say, okay, not only what are these ideals that we can strive for, but what are the actual developmental archetypes that help us along our journey and in our own evolution. And I was inspired by Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Her Gnostic Gospels, there is a Gospel of Mary, by the way.
Correct, yes.
And what I noticed in these Gospels and in that example is that the spiritual aspect draws things forward. And it's through the spiritual lens. And I will make a distinction between spiritual and spiritualized, right? Spiritualism is different than spirituality. Spirituality is the active life force of spirit coming through us made vivid by this masculine experience and feminine experience, gay experience, straight experience, et cetera, of different ethnicities, but not determined by them. And that's what I really loved about their example. And that's what also, you know, not just that inspiration, but the inspiration of my own relationship with my spirit, with collaborating with people like you and trying to bring spirit into a central leadership role that gave rise to these archetypes. And I don't know if you want me to talk briefly about them.
Yes, please let us know about the archetypes of masculinity that you described in your book. And by the way, thank you for this wonderful parallel.
Yes. I mean, the thing is, we are moving into a time of not only equality in terms of political, economic equality between men and women, but spiritual equality. And spiritual equality demands that we vivify our masculinity and femininity and offer it in great love and respect to one another. And that goes well beyond battle of the sexes, which is kind of what I would call the animal man emphasis, or just cooperation and learning to get along, which is more the social man or type that I was talking about, into a co-creative framework where men and women, boys and girls too, learn to enjoy and receive the energy of masculinity and femininity to actually enhance ourselves as individuals, as societies and communities, and as spirits, learning in the world through experience. One of the greatest things that I'm sure you've come across this is the notion of wisdom. Wisdom is always oftentimes associated with Sophia or the feminine, and also with the serpent, right? Or the dragon. And so it's always, there's a tortured relationship with it. Patriarchy can't stand feminine power, and it can't stand wisdom, which is basically knowledge married with experience in the presence of spirit. And so it's tried to make all these stories about snakes and being tempted and so forth. Well, I will just say it right now. I want to be tempted by the serpent. I wanted to be tempted by that snake, which is also considered that kundalini that rises in a coil right up through your body. I want to be able to be instructed in that. And in that evolutionary path and coming into contact with my own spirit, I wouldn't say exactly channeled, but I received spiritual nudgings to develop archetypes of masculinity that are both practical and spiritually evolutionary, so that I could include every single man and every aspect of my own masculinity within me without shame, including the toxic man, part of the animal man, the regressed forms of manhood, to help them come around and be held, as well as the more evolved forms. So right off, I decided I was going to start these archetypes without having a quote unquote bad guy and a good guy. Right.
Oh, that's very good. That's very good, because I wanted to say we have to go back also to the old archetypes so they do not run our lives, right? Because very often when people, even in discussion of goddesses, they go back to the old archetypes like Radha or Kali, you know, and they are good and they have value, but we have to upgrade them, right? We really have to upgrade them. And I really love this metaphor that you did about the snake and also about the biblical metaphor, because I also feel the same way. You know, I want to I want to eat from the forbidden fruit, so to speak, right? Because this is where the knowledge is. Not forbidden is just a coining wisdom, right? Why wisdom should be forbidden, right? So I don't believe in the forbidden part. So I want to eat from this truth, you know, I want to be tempted as well, because it leads me to wisdom and to a cooperation between masculine and co-creativity, as you call it, between masculine and feminine. So please go for the archetypes. You know, we really want to know about them.
I will, and I'll just put a little thing on there that will join this with the archetypes. And just to let your audience know that there are two versions of human life and spirituality. The first is in the very first verse of the Bible, basically Genesis 1:1. And there's the second, which is Genesis 1:2. And these are the two radically different things, right? The first one says that creation is all good. talks about basically original blessing. It talks about men and women both being made in the image of God, co-equally, okay? It talks about a vegan diet. It talks about, again, it has nothing but blessing. Then you go from that just to the next verse, okay? And it talks about men and women being tempted to eat the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, being cast out of paradise, and the woman being inflicted with pain during childbirth, and the man forced to toil and sweat. And I'm like, what's going on here?
A wrong turn, right?
Yes, I'm going with the first one. Right? Original blessing, co-equal, and there was also a council. It said we and not just I. It wasn't a male God, and it wasn't a singular God. It was a council of entities or wisdom. So to me, that is very important. There are different entities, male and female are different energies, but they are collaborative and they are necessary for one another and they are joyous together. So I have always gone from that standpoint, and I reject the patriarchal turn. I am completely compassionate with it. I get that we are in the spirit form, and that second story is a disenchanted interpretation of being in these creative realms free of pain, where you can create at the speed of thought, as my wife says. And then you're brought into this denser environment. I'm completely compassionate to that interpretation or that experience, like you've been kicked out. Yeah. But I also want to say, you weren't just kicked out. You know, the problem with the tree of life is it didn't have the capacity to have experience, to combine the lower with the higher, and to let that, and to combine the man, the female with the male horizontally, and the lower with the higher vertically. It's amazing that this can exist in our world, in this human being. And given that as a background, to begin to see evolutionarily, with an inclusive approach, what we are and where we're going, what we can be and where we're going. And that's what brought these archetypes out. The first one is the animal man. That's that primal man that's a very much like that second version in the Bible, right? It believes that survival is the most important thrust, and that somehow we were to some degree cast out of something. We've got to earn ourselves out of this wound and towards some kind of success or some kind of protection and safety. I completely understand it. And it's important still today to retain within one's own masculinity and to be aware of it, and also to understand and include it going forward. But it's not an endpoint. Like you, we need to evolve past it while still including it and bringing it with us. So that archetype, the animal man, the one that is driven by force and effort and desire, okay, is still attractive in many ways. I mean, sexually and so forth, desire moves the universe, and the animal man has a lot of it. But if it's only desire, it's problematic, right? So that's the whole point. Include, but don't stop there. The animal man is composed of three basically sorts of men: the regressed, the transitional, and the evolved. The animal man's more the traditional man, and the one that might even be somewhat associated with the patriarchal man. It's very primal. In its regressed form, it's what I call the toxic man, where life is conquest, especially conquering women, conquering environment, dominating, putting others down. Again, it's regressed for a reason, okay? Oftentimes associated with predatory behavior. And say, well, what would you want to retain from that, Zeus? The only thing to retain from that is the evolutionary necessity to recognize what it's calling us to be and do. And it's calling us into relationship, honoring, and respect. And that kind of, quote, fallenness brings us there. So when a person moves from that, a man moves from that rudimentary and toxic thing to what I call the striving man, who believes that life is a race, right, or a competition, we actually have progress. Now the man says, I'm not here to just conquer women. I'm here to conquer the world in some ways. I'm here to move into attainment, accomplishment, right? I need to really apply myself and prove myself. And you can see how the logical ascension into that shows that evolutionary path, right? That person can be kind of a workaholic. Oftentimes a person can admire how much they can produce. Oftentimes they can be quite brilliant, but also really preoccupied. Unfortunately, more centered on themselves. Again, that man is being called out into concern for others, called out of that self-focus by going into the evolutionary, what I call evolved state, which is the responsible man. The responsible sort of traditional or animal man is one that can provide, protect, sacrifice, and serve. The one that can, even though being a little stoic, still a little bit self-focused, can actually extend himself for others. And again, that's laudable. And that becomes part of the evolutionary path, but only part of it. There's a problem with that, and it is the tendency to dominate and to see everything as a threat to one's own survival. There needs to be some grace, some ability to be warm, some ability to move into belonging, community, relationship, some more tender aspect of what it means to be a man. And it's from that I began to say, okay, we're moving beyond that more sort of rigid man into something that's a little bit warmer and more amenable to relationship with women, and something I call the social man. That's the broader type. And when there's three kinds, right? Or three sorts of forms of men. The regressed form is the retreating man. Okay, now the retreating man sees all the damage of the dominance and over striving, and he doesn't want to be part of that, but he's kind of overcompensated. He's been a Peter Pan, he runs away. Can be kind of boyish, can be charming in a certain way, but you can't be very relied upon very much. And I'm sure
like responsibilities, right?
Yes, exactly. And in some ways it forfeits manhood altogether, and women find them to be charming initially, but then get frustrated very quickly, oftentimes with that kind of man, because they have to be relied upon in a certain way in a relationship to show up. And oftentimes the retreating man does not. So as the retreating man develops, oftentimes the influence of women in his life, some degree of maturity, some degree of responsibility, he evolves into the confused man. He's not rejecting and running away. He's openly sincerely attempting to engage responsibility, to engage roles, to provide something that is not simply just because he's the king of the house, right? The man on the throne, the ruler on the throne, trying to be an equal relationship, but doesn't know exactly how to do that. These are the kind of people that knock around the world for, they go, the 6-month trip to South America. They're just trying to find themselves to a certain degree and find out what the relationship is with the world. And as that person begins to evolve, we have what's called the equal man, the evolved form of the social man. And here's a guy who can hold a job, who can play a responsible parenting role, is in equal relationship with his mate, and can in many ways seem like the ideal man when it comes to actually living, having a family, and so forth. And a lot of people say, well, why don't we just stop there? I like that guy. But but what happens when that couple, that man, gets past middle age, becomes a grandparent, not just a parent, kids are leaving the house, job is beginning to fade into the rearview mirror, retirement is approaching. Now, where's the purpose there? The spirit always invites us to learn, grow, and evolve, especially with regard to our soul's development and our spiritual development. And this is where I say in my book, when a man ages, this is his time, which is exactly the opposite of traditional archetypes. They always have vigor at the very center of it, right? You're making a splash. You're the fool. Even the sacred fool is making a splash. In this case, it's higher, it's more powerful, but it's also more subtle, right? And as a man loses attachments with the world, or they get taken from him as he ages, right? His body begins to fall away from him. His centrality to society begins to fall away from them, except for those people who continue to be stuck in these evolutionary things, or they're that 80-year-old guy dating the 20-year-old, right? Again, I'm not trying to criticize that. I'll say that's not very helpful for your evolution. Okay. So now we're invited to let go of the attachments of the world and really address spirit as a real intelligent and inhabiting energy, right? So what does that feel like? Does it mean you transcend the world and you leave the animal man, the social man behind? No, they're still incorporated, but they don't drive you. They're not the edge of growth. Now, as these things begin to flow away and you've gone through them and you've evolved through these steps to a large extent, even though you still include them in your being, now you're being invited to have a different basis upon which to develop meaning. And this is where you have the regressed form also emerging. And it's the despairing man. It's like, I'm not needed anymore. Everything that I had, my parenting, my job is now falling away from me. What good am I? Why am I even on this planet? Especially as age starts to go up, 80, 90, whereas before you would only live to be 40 or 50. This becomes more and more relevant in our modern times. And it's that despair, that sense that life is hopeless, which allows you to go through a grieving process to give up those attachments to the spiritual world and allow yourself to open to a connection with the spirit as an active principle that really begins to start the evolutionary track with the co-creative man. That's the larger category. And with that, the three forms: the despairing man, which I just described. Yeah. Then there is the searching man, which is let me see if let's see. It's searching. Yes, the searching man, and that person may look a little bit like the confused man from the social man, but this time it's a little more affirmative. It's a little bit more maturing. And it says, I know, unlike the confused man, I know that there's a purpose here. I can feel it in my being. And now it's time to learn what that might be. Now it's time to explore who I am at a deeper level, not just my roles, not just my obligations or connections, but who I as a creative being have to offer this world, and how I can make connections with other creative beings to create really interesting, positive, healthy, powerful forms of association, forms of invention, whatever it happens to be. And that then, once a person goes along that track, the evolved form is the spiritually confident man.
And I think this is very important. I think this is a very important part of our journey, whether masculine or feminine, allowing ourselves the space, for searching. So we do not just blindly fall into our old roles, right? So we have to honor this part, I think. Do you agree? Of a searching man or a searching woman?
I explicitly and powerfully agree. What we have had problems with the archetypes of the past is they tended to be descriptive roles. They tended to be boxes. You just had to mimic the attributes of that. And to a certain extent, you can mimic those and still experience that archetype. But as an evolutionary thing bringing you forward in a creative direction, it's like doing a play with the script already written. Now you're actually receiving the play, the material being written on your being from the spirit coming through you in your interactions with you, between you and someone else, between you and a new experience. It's more like improvisational comedy than it is a scripted play.
Yes, there will be some trials and errors for sure.
Yes, but you will find that there are certain improvisations which will work and really make your spirit quiver, and other ones that will fall flat. So that's fine. The nice thing about this is you don't really have a lot to prove, but you have a lot to create, and you have a lot to explore, and you have a lot to try and experiment with. And that's the way it should be, right? You have some experience behind you. You're not just dominated by survival of the animal man. You're not just dominated by the belonging community of the social man. Now you're kind of a bit of a free agent, right? You're being invited to create for the sake of creativity and for the sake of enhancing the world that has given so much to you. So it could come in the form of volunteerism, it could come in the form of mentoring, it can come in the form of other forms of invention, writing, journaling, you name it. But they have a more subtle and a more energetic footprint rather than a relationship one or an achievement one.
And this requires certain openness, right? This requires certain openness. Like I am prepared, encouraged to go into uncertainty, really, because we are on now from this archetype, we are on the evolutionary path.
Yes, and this is where you draw from the desire of the animal man, but you don't just gear it towards some role, you gear it toward an embrace and an almost a kind of rebellious kind of kind of like an agent provocateur to uncertainty. You're like, bring it on. Bring on that uncertainty. I love uncertainty. Whereas before, the only was like, uncertainty? Are you kidding me? That's a threat to my survival. In this mode of the co-creative man, especially the spiritually confident man, you're like, heck yeah, uncertainty means possibility. And possibility means I can grow and learn new things. And even if I fail, I got nothing to apologize for, really. And in terms of for my own being, for myself, I don't have to worry about being torn down because I've left so many of those things behind, the positioning. Now, obviously, you would have to apologize if you hurt someone or you hurt someone's feelings or you cross purposes there, but that's also part of the uncertainty.
And I think, Zeus, I'm sorry. And I think, Zeus, that it's also okay to admit that, okay, so it's okay. I'm a little bit scared because it's uncertainty, but, I'm going for it because what's left is just the old, right? I know the past, and to go to the future, I have to take certain risks.
Absolutely. And even in this framework, you don't even see them as risks because really what's going to happen? They're going to die anyway.
That's true.
Let's face it. Okay. So why not leave it all on the table? So the worst that can happen in this, if you really are truly honest about it, is that you don't learn something or it falls flat. Really. I mean, you have enough wisdom at this point where you're not going to actively hurt somebody. Probably you're going to be sensitive enough as a man, you're going to be courageous enough and developed enough and accomplished enough to have certain skills. But now you're going to actually see the world as a buffet, as a banquet, where you're just going to go into it and you're going to let spirit come through you and interact with that world. And what resonates then draws you. And that's what you devote yourself to. It's kind of nice. You got the best of both worlds. You don't have to make everything up. The meaning is coming through you and in your interaction. But in some ways you can't fail either. Because even if you fail in this effort, you learn, which is a success. And even if you fail to a certain degree, you create something, some knowledge, something that can be offered to the world. And so in that sense, you're in an area of spiritual growth and success, even when you fail.
That's right. And you redefine success. You are going to define what is success for you in the stage, isn't it? Rather than falling again into what other people think success is, which is again very scripted.
Exactly. And this is where divine genius comes in. And it's a very central and maybe the central concept in my book. Everyone has a divine genius that is nowhere else in the universe. A miraculous, amazing theme or talent, right? That is there for you to contribute to the world that you and you alone can provide. And it's not based on proving something. It's already in you. It's inherent to you. It's intrinsic to you. And so here's this opportunity to bring forth something that just needs to share itself. And that is why it's so blessed and beautiful. Because you can leave it all out there. You're going to die anyway. All the other stuff and all the preliminary experience and the roles you played have supported this. And now it's time to take the adventure.
So Zeus, who is then the spiritually confident man? Because when I was searching for a spiritually confident woman, archetypes of goddesses, I came across a Hindu goddess Sundari, who is, intellectually, spiritually, sexually, completely assured, and she's in her own power. But I actually struggled to even find examples of women like that in our history. And eventually I did, but I noticed that, they were kind of suppressed because they were considered a dangerous alternative, I guess. So what about masculine archetype of spiritually confident man?
Well, I would say the archetype is the Horus archetype, right? Horus in Egyptology. Horus is also Yeshua or Jesus. Again, Jesus appears to be a historical figure, so I'm not going to limit it to the historical figure. But the Horus/Jesus archetype, as it's embodied, and if any of the tales are correct or the parables are correct about Jesus, you see an example of a spiritually confident man in I'm gobsmacked that they're still retained within the context of, for instance, the New Testament Gospels. What you look into those, what is the spiritually confident man doing, or what is Jesus doing as a spiritually confident man? again, this has been colonized, right?
Yeah.
This guy is a radical spiritualist, right? Turning over money tables and challenging all the spiritual and religious authorities of his day. He's a complete and utter revolutionary. But is there any more radical thing that is spiritually confident than say, love your enemy? Just think of that and that alone. Those 3 words, love thy enemy or love your enemy. How spiritually confident do you have to be to actually do that in a way that's effective, right? That doesn't mean kowtow to them, make excuses for them, bow down to them. Loving is it's an affirmative, enriching, embracing notion. And in the context of the New Testament Gospels, and also, by the way, and I would encourage everyone to read these, the Gnostic Gospels, right? Including the Gospel of Mary, among other things, and the Gospel of Thomas. Very powerful. What each of these have is the inversion. The least shall be first, right? And the first shall be last, right? It has this inversion in which a person has such a regard and an understanding and a knowing that their spirit transcends even their own life, that this person can challenge authority and not be even afraid to die, right? To do that. Now that's a little extreme, obviously. There are much more humble ways to do that.
And so because we're coming almost to the end of this, I so regret it because it's a fantastic conversation, but then how can we take it to a more mundane level, regular woman, regular man? Because not everybody can be Mary Magdalene and not everybody can be Jesus.
Here's how you can do it in a humble way. Admit that you're wrong as a man. That's a spiritually confident thing to do. Admit when you're wrong. Apologize. Take the time to learn from children and express your gratitude for learning from children and from women. See things not in terms of competition, but in terms of collaboration. And then in that, allow yourself to listen, right? Allow yourself to respect and inquire into the lives of others, right? This is very, unfortunately, true of most men, including me. I'm still working on it. I tend to talk more than I listen. I tend to still either unconsciously or consciously resist admitting that I'm wrong. And I could do far better to actually learn into the particular unique and divine genius of children. Now I'm getting better at it, okay, as I get more spiritually confident.
Yes.
Those practices, just those simple 3 or 4 practices that I just mentioned, will go a long way to developing a certain spiritual confidence and much better relationships as well.
Oh, thank you, Zeus. This was truly wonderful. This should have been a much longer podcast. And Zeus, apart from your book, how can our listeners connect with you?
You can simply contact me at Zeus, Z-E-U-S, at askdrzeus.com. That's ASKDRZEUS.com. You can go to my website at the same thing, askdrzeus.com. I do have like an emotional test there, a quick test there. I have an ability to contact me. You can write me directly. I respond to people. I do counseling and other kinds of things as well. So if you have relationship or other kinds of personal or spiritual coaching, you can find me there as well. And you can also reach me at my phone number, 310-994-7808.
Thank you, Zeus. This was wonderful. This was a fantastic conversation. So with this, we have to bring this podcast to the end. If you enjoyed this conversation, sign in to the Other Goddess podcast. You can check the longer and expanded version of this interview on my YouTube channel, Dr. Joanna Kujawa. And please check the links below for more information about our books, A Spiritually Confident Man, and The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene, and the Goddesses of Eros and Secret Knowledge. Until next time, thank you.